When Jay Shabat launched his newsletter in 2004, he had absolutely no experience in journalism or in operating a media company. This was also long before the era when it became easy to distribute paid newsletters. But what Jay did have was a passionate fascination with the airline industry, and he leveraged that passion to build a loyal readership. In our interview, we discussed how he found readers in a pre-social media age, his pricing strategy, and why he decided to sell the company in 2018. Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and this is The Business of Content, the show about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. If you want to listen to an audio version of this show, subscribe to The Business of Content wherever you get your podcast. One other thing, have you ever wanted to pick my brain about your own media business? A few months ago, I launched a new feature that allows paid subscribers to my newsletter to schedule a half-hour phone call with me. Once you become a subscriber, you receive an automated email with a Calendly link for you to book the call. I've been holding these calls for a few months now, and some of my subscribers told me that the call alone was worth their entire subscription price. To schedule a call with me, go to simonowens.substack.com. That's simonowens.substack.com. Or just Google the word Simon Owens and newsletter. Okay, on to my interview with Jay. Hey Jay, thanks for joining us.
Hi Simon, thank you.
So you started a publication all the way back in 2004 targeted at the airline industry. What was your interest into the airlines prior to launching that?
Sure, I'll give you a little bit of the origin story. I actually was working as an intern in college for an airline at the time called U.S. Airways, and today it's a part of American Airlines. And that's how I sort of learned the industry and became interested in it. And so after college, they hired me. I worked for a couple of years there. Then I worked for a couple of years.
What were you doing for them?
I was doing revenue management, which is, you can say, pricing and deciding which seats to reserve for the lowest fares and which seat to hold off of the corporate travelers, that sort of thing, demand forecasting.
And this was like when Priceline and these other things were probably just starting to come online and stuff like that?
Even before that, yeah. It was many moons ago. So I started in the late 90s. So yeah, and I guess, no, you're right. I guess they were just about starting. Towards when I was at U.S. Airways towards the end, those, you're right, those kind of online travel agencies were starting to get popular and developing. So that is correct.
And so you were working, you had a actual inside look at the revenue and business side of these particular companies.
Yes, and it was when you say particular companies, the airlines, yes. Again, the Pricelines of the world, the Expedias, they were just started. I actually did, interestingly enough, you bring that up and you're kind of jogging my memory here. As an intern, I actually worked in for a team called Electronic Marketing, I think it was. And we were, at that time, U.S. Airways, this was in 1996. And at that time, U.S. Airways is actually developing an in-house software to kind of do what Priceline does. And this is before, everybody knew that the internet was going to be, where everybody booked their tickets and stuff. So it was literally like CDs that we mailed to people, that like the customers, where they could, it was booking software. They can do the booking themselves. So so I got a little taste of that early on, where sort of the origins of that, of online booking and that. But yeah, to answer your question, I mean, it was very interesting perspective on, how airlines made money, where they made money, which routes and stuff like that. So yeah, just absolutely fascinating me. And then after trying to remember the sequence, but I did go to graduate school after I worked at Air France. And then after graduate school is when I started this newsletter called Airline Weekly.
And what was your, because obviously like a paid email newsletter all the way back then was kind of an anomaly. What was your interest in media? I looked at your LinkedIn, you didn't seem really to have any kind of background in media at all. What was kind of the interest there?
Zero journalism background or anything like that. I studied business in school and international relations, economics in grad school. So no, what it was just when I was working for the airlines, I just used to read a lot of publications. I was, even in college, I was kind of addicted to this stuff. I'd go to the libraries and read the old, airline trade publications cover to cover back, decades ago. So I remember like doing it at the time. reading it and thinking like, I think I can do this, and I think I can do it in a compelling way. I always liked to write, and that was always something, in school I was always better at writing and math, and so yeah, I was like, I can do this, and it would be really cool to start my own thing. So I tried, and in the beginning, very early on, I had one partner, and then later that person left, two other people came on, and then the three of us developed the company from pretty much, it was from very early on. It was the three of us. So I handled all the writing and the research, the content essentially, and they ran the business.
And
So
did it dawn on you that there was, this is 2004, the blogosphere is just getting kind of revved up. Was there some kind of, I feel like a lot of media entrepreneurs, especially in those early days, it kind of just dawned on them like, wow, like all these barriers to entry are going away. I can, me, just a guy sitting in his bedroom or whatever, can start a publication and compete with the other, like you said, you were reading those airline trade publications. I can compete all of them with virtually no money. Was that did that seep into your head at any point? Was there that light bulb moment?
absolutely, and this was before social media, but absolutely just the ability to email a PDF. I mean, back in those days, it was just PDF. Just to be able to PDF something that I wrote to, hundreds of people, thousands of people even. It's like, okay, this is a new ball game. This is new opportunity. So yeah, and then as time went on, it became even more so like that with social media and the ability to attract audiences. Now, I'm not a marketing person. I never really got too involved on that side. It was, for me, it's always content. Even today, and we'll get into more about some of the things I'm doing today, but that's 95% of what I do is just reading, writing, research, and putting together as best a product as I can.
Yeah, so there was no Substack back in 2004, obviously. There were a
No.
lot of these tools that we kind of take for granted, like weren't, and even charging for stuff online, like if you weren't Amazon or eBay or something like that, wasn't, always easy, and I mentioned that the blogosphere was coming up, but you chose to do not only an email newsletter, but like a PDF. So you don't have to go super deep in the logistics, but how did you settle on the actual product itself and how you would charge and how it would be delivered?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I can't even recall like all the details because we're going back 2 decades now. But yeah, I mean, I remember thinking that because it was targeted to a corporate audience, that it should be, more of a higher price point. I think our original price point was like $6.95 per year back in 2004, whenever we started. And honestly, that was just kind of, pulled out of nowhere. It wasn't really, not too much science that went into that. I probably looked at, I remember there was something, a very popular airline newsletter that was called Aviation Daily, which was as it indicates, it was a daily type thing. And I remember they charged like it was like, I don't know, $2,000 or whatever, something like that. So I was thinking, okay, we're a weekly, maybe we do a couple hundred. So very unscientific. And then gradually when my two colleagues started working with me, they developed, they kind of fine-tuned the pricing. A lot of our subscribers were, under enterprise licenses. So, a big company would be paying for 30, 40 readers, and they would negotiate that.
And so the publication you launched it was called Airline Weekly, right?
Right, correct.
And as you mentioned, you had no journalism experience. You had an obsession with airlines, and so you had worked in them. What was the format to start out with? Like, what was the actual product, and from a content perspective, that you were sending in this PDF every week?
Yeah, so I wanted to give people just kind of I wanted to make this product so that, if someone read it, if you were working for a big airline or even less so an airline, but if you were doing business with an airline, if you were a bank or travel agency or consulting company, that you could walk into a meeting with an airline and kind of have your finger on the pulse, at least, even if you weren't an expert. So every week I would do one kind of in-depth article, and it was a lot of, just a lot of work went into it. So that article might have been on, American Airlines strategy, or the what's going on at Barcelona airport, whatever. And we covered the worldwide airline industry, and then we did very in-depth coverage of earnings. So anytime an airline would report their financial results, we would write write about that in depth. We'd listen to the earnings calls, and that's something that's changed a lot. When I first started, there might have been 5 or 10 airlines that actually, had their calls that you can listen to through the web. Now it's, maybe 100. So that's changed a lot. But yeah, we had a section, and still do, by the way, and we'll talk more about the present later, but we had a section on, where airlines are flying, so their routes. If an airline, made a decision, Qantas is going to make a new route from Sydney to California, that kind of stuff.
And where were you getting all this information? Like, were you picking up the phone and calling people? Was this like just information where you knew to look for these sources that publicly displayed it and you could just kind of curate and summarize it?
Yeah, it's a good question. Combination of things. So it was absolutely, just knowing people, having worked in the industry was a big help. We all have one or two of these friends who are absolutely, there's one of my friends, I won't mention his name, but we call him Yoda, the Yoda of the airline industry, because, they were just people who taught me so much over, how to think about the airline industry, how to put things in perspective. And then very critical also, in addition to just talking to people like that, was I did subscribe to a database called Factiva, which I think is Dow Jones, right? And that's a collection of like just news articles from all around the world. Every single day, search, any news article that came up in any newspaper around the world that had the word airline or aircraft in it, airways, whatever. I would look at it, look at the headline. If I thought it was good, I'd read it. And, I'd spend hours and hours reading. And that was like a big part of my job, just like sifting through that and then sort of synthesizing everything. And then, as I mentioned, in addition to the kind of the news articles and talking to people, also just listening to earnings calls and investor presentations and government documents. I mean, all of that stuff. And that's become just much more voluminous over time. There's a lot more of it now. But all of that just combined. And I think that's kind of the value, probably what I do best is I can take just a very large amount of information and synthesize it in a way that's easy to read. I think that's kind of my superpower, I guess, if you can call it that. But yeah, that's, I think, sort of the secret sauce.
So I think in the beginning, or at least for a long time, there was no free version of the newsletter. So like, what was your marketing strategy to educate the industry that this thing even existed?
Yeah. So in the beginning, it was largely just sending it to people I know and, hey, can you pass it on? And how the industries are all very close knit. So it kind of got around that way. Now what really, the first year or so was difficult to gain traction. What really kind of was the rocket booster, so to speak, was we started going to conferences, industry conferences, fantastically helpful. I went to a few myself. My colleague traveled all around the world, and it turned out to where the return on those on an investment like that was just so good for us. We would spend even if we had to go to Singapore, which my colleague did at least on one or two occasions to a conference, that might be a $2,000 trip, but just getting 2 subscriptions would make it worthwhile, or 3 subscriptions, whatever. And then you consider the renewals, and it was just such a compelling return on that. So he just just traveled incessantly, and at that point we just you meet 1 or 2 people at a conference, next conference meet 1 or 2 people, and just grows and grows.
Like you're literally just going up and talking to people and then trying to pitch them like, hey, if you want to sign up for my newsletter, here's where you can do it. Or what was that actual process like?
Yeah, or can I send you a few free issues? Do you like it? Here's a print copy. Bring it back with you on the plane. Read it. And that was, usually we found if people, it's Airline Weekly is written in a very interesting, compelling way. So we found that if we get people to actually read it, there's a good chance they'll subscribe. So if they're the right person, of course. Now, eventually, my colleague, I don't do much of it. My colleague was invited to speak at these conferences, and just you go to enough of them and you start knowing everybody, and so that's very helpful as well.
And who ended up subscribing? Like, was it just like people who worked at airlines, or is it all the companies that's, because it must be a huge sprawling industry where there's people who work at the airlines directly. There's lots of companies that service them, like obviously Boeing and Airbus and stuff like that. And the food and the toiletries and all those millions of other things that make a plane work. And then obviously I'm guessing, just travel industry stuff needs to know what's going on with airlines, like travel agents. What was kind of the core demographics of your readership?
Yeah, I mean, I think it basically answered your own question. I mean, just it's the companies that you said. I won't say too much about that because I'm now writing it on behalf of someone else. But but yeah, you can imagine aviation is a very, very large ecosystem. So it's there's just a lot of people out there who need to know what's going on in the industry.
And how long did it take after launching it in 2004, where you to the point where you felt like you were profitable and drawing like a decent middle class income where you could at least pay yourself?
I would say 2 to 3 years. Yeah, first year was extremely difficult, partially because, well, my partners came on about a year. The two partners that I ultimately developed a business with came on after that first year. So the first year was a little bit of a wash. I mean, a lot of development, but then once they came on, good. I'd say solid 2 years.
And so the internet starts quickly evolving post 2004. Obviously, the blogosphere gets larger. A lot of email service providers like MailChimp and others, Constant Contact, come online. Social media comes around. SEO starts playing a major part. How did the publication evolve at all in terms of its marketing or how it was publishing over the next 14 years or so?
Yeah, so we were surprisingly, and I'm taking you up until 2018 is when we sold the company, and we'll get to that. But we were surprisingly low tech and pretty minimal in our uses. Almost, I mean, we never really used social media, and we used. I remember again. This is I'm speaking a little bit secondhand here because again I was just doing the content, and that never changed. I mean, the content was always. If you look at an issue of Airline Weekly from 2004, it looked not too different than it looked like in 2018, right before we sold. So, and even to a certain extent today. So it's content-wise, not too much change. I know, yeah, my colleague was kind of using the same sort of, but we never used MailChimp or anything like that. We, he just had a simple Excel sheet and some program that, I don't know if he built it himself or what, just very, very rudimentary. Very high maintenance type thing, but it just worked for us, so we never changed. Towards the end, once a few years, year or two prior to our selling, we were starting to think about, well, do we need an app and things like this. People were asking, well, we don't want to read it on a PDF anymore. We want to read an app. So we were starting to get thinking about that, and even initiated a few projects, but most of it was pretty low tech and rudimentary.
And did you ever reach a point prior to the acquisition to where you were hiring other content creators, or was it really just you the entire time, doing the bulk of the content?
Yeah, no, I was always. It's just the way it was always 100% me writing and researching and doing all the content. And then my colleagues, I had one colleague that would. Occasionally write articles and stuff as well, particularly just if I was away or on vacation or something. But it was very much just me producing the content. Now it's different today. I'm sure we'll get to that, but that's the way it was.
So in 2018, you're acquired by Skift, which is kind of like a somewhat new B2B travel industry publication. What was the motivation? What was the process there? Did they approach you? Did you decide to gear up to start selling? Like what was that run up like to actually be acquired?
Yeah, good question. I'm trying to remember the exact who initiated her, but yeah, no, I remember getting into discussion with them, and I think we were ready. One of my partners in particular was eager to just to he was just pretty much exhausted and wanted to move on. So yeah, the Skift came along, and we were very impressed by them. For those of you who know Skift, we like to call ourselves like the Bloomberg of travel. We really we cover all aspects of travel around the world, and I think they were just looking for more heft in the aviation space. They were hotels. They're I think even to this today they're just very 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 strong, and so they they we started talking, and one thing led to another, and I'm still a Skift employee today. So
Yeah, so you came on as a consultant after that acquisition. What kind of changes did Skip? Because I looked at the website; it's definitely much more modern. It's not just a PDF that they send. There's
yeah.
actually web versions of the newsletter and the articles that you're publishing. It looks like there's even a metered paywall now, so there's free content that people that's easier to sample. So, what was kind of the transformation that happened post acquisition to kind of modernize the Airline Weekly?
Yeah. So first of all, I came on as a full-time employee. So that my colleagues did not. They came on in consulting contracts, and they went on kind of did their own thing afterwards. But I came on as a full-time employee, and yeah, as you suggested, Skift just professionalized it, made it much more. The marketing, the pricing, just fine-tuned. They're just very not only very good at it, but they also have a lot of good talent that they were able to apply to it. I was not involved in any of that at all. That's again, I'm a content person. I did my thing. So the and they came in also. Their graphic designer said, okay, we're gonna change the way it looks, make it more professional. We were we were using largely the same old PDF simple fonts that I created in my parents' bedroom back in back in the so yeah, they just kind of a lot of professionalization, and I continue to just cover the industry as I always did.
Yeah, so you were still like a lead writer for the publication. Did they bring on other writers?
Yeah, well, when my two colleagues left, they brought on one person who worked closely with me, and he contributed as well. That's Madhu Unnikrishnan is his name, and yeah, we remain friends today. He's no longer with Skift. He is working for somewhere else, but he and I work closely together on producing the issue each week.
And is it still just the newsletter, or are you branching into other mediums like podcasts or anything like that?
Yep. So we do a podcast as well. So we have the Airline Weekly podcast, and we have a conference as well, the Skift Aviation Forum, which is in Dallas, Fort Worth every fall. So if any aviation people, encourage you to come out, and it's pretty cool. We always get the CEOs and top execs from across the industry, airlines, airports, and whatnot.
When
So
did
we do
that
that as
launch?
well. The Skift Aviation Forum, I want to say, I think it was online, virtual 1 year because of the pandemic, and then maybe did they stop here? I'm not sure, but I know it was. I think last year was the first year post pandemic that they restarted, or at least was in person, and then we're doing it again this year.
And like how many people attend that?
Don't know, but it's I'm not sure if it hits 1,000, but several hundred for sure.
And did the pricing change for Airline Weekly after the acquisition?
Yeah, I believe it did. I don't get involved in that. Like I said, I leave that to people much smarter than me on that. But I believe again, they just the way to look at it. I mean, Skift to just apply much more more scientific based approach than we were ever doing, and that includes the pricing, it includes the marketing, the graphics, everything. So yeah, they.
And do they have like a sales team that's like calling up all these industry executives and saying, let's sell you a license for 50, versions of this or 50 accounts of this newsletter or anything like that?
We do, yeah. We have a sales team. Yep, very very well accomplished sales team who's negotiates deals with companies on. Yeah. So
Yeah. So after you were acquired, you later started toying around with some new publications. One I believe was like a economics 101 type newsletter on Substack. I think you've kind of wound that down after some experimentation. But another one that you launched was centered around the railroad industry, also on Substack, right? I guess like to start off with before we get into what that publication does, like how would your 2004 self react to Substack, getting to play around with this tool and all its different features for locking stuff behind a paywall and processing payments and stuff like that? Is that something that your 2004 self would be like, oh, wow, this is definitely what we're launching on?
Yeah, I think so. I think my 2004 self would be very, yeah, because again, for someone like me, I mean, I can't speak for someone who's maybe real good at maybe who can do their own programming or whatever, but for someone who's just no experience with marketing, no experience with, it, it's it's great. I mean, it just makes it so easy, and yeah, it's totally worth what they charge. So yeah, I think the answer is I would have been very impressed as in my 29-year-old self.
Yeah. So the railroad industry, you think of it as this old school, 19th century almost industry, but it's really, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, a central hub of our entire economy, huge industry. From what I can tell, the companies that operate in it are very profitable. Partly because they have kind of like a locked in customer base and not kind of like cable companies where, it's probably pretty expensive to lay down new rail lines. So there's like a built in almost monopoly, I'm guessing, in certain areas and stuff like that. What is so enticing about that industry that you wanted to, launch a publication around it?
Yeah, and let me just back up briefly and say that I did, for a short period, I did leave Skift, and I tried as you alluded to, a newsletter about the U.S. economy, which I did for a while. It was just mostly something I wanted to get out of my system. I had studied economics in school, and it's still something that is a big hobby of mine. I just follow the U.S. airline very, very closely, economy, excuse me, very, very closely. So I wrote that for a while, and I actually very recently turned some of that material from Econ Weekly into a book. It's called American Places, so I'm marketing that book now. But I do not do, as you said, I don't do Econ Weekly anymore. There's not enough time for that. I did, however, in my interlude between my times at Skift, I did begin a newsletter, like you said, called Railroad Weekly, about the railroad industry. And everything you said about it is true. It's extremely profitable. Operating profit margins similar to Microsoft and Meta. It's Silicon Valley type. Some of it is because, as you mentioned, monopoly-like pricing for certain customers anyway. And yeah, just a very different from airlines, by the way. Airlines.
Well, how is it different? Because obviously airlines went through a deregulation, and now like you said, there are hundreds of airlines now versus the dozen or so that you were covering when you first launched it. How does the railroad industry kind of differ from the airline industry, especially as covering it from a B2B perspective?
Well, I'll give you one example. So if an airline produces a profit margin of 10%, it's time to party. If a railroad produces an operating margin of 10%, it's a crisis because it's a typical railroad operating margin these days is more like 40%. So it's just a much, much more profitable industry. It's more consolidated. The airline industry has become very consolidated as well. Now, I should clearly state that I write about airlines globally. I write, I cover airlines all around the world. For railroads, I just focus on North America, and there's only about 6 or 7 big ones, depending if you include Mexico or whatnot. But there's essentially 4 big ones in the U.S. now, and 2 big ones in Canada. And then there's a whole bunch. There's hundreds of smaller railroads. We call them short lines, and they, they're an important part of the ecosystem as well. But then, yeah, it's just a very big, as you said, it's railroads are essential to the economy, and we kind of learned that during the pandemic. The whole supply chain, logistics, they're very instrumental in all that. And then when that broke down during the pandemic, it was a big problem. So yeah, it's extremely interesting industry. I got to learn a lot about it. Yeah, it's fun to, and now it's mostly, I continue to do it. It's mostly just a, weekend thing for me now. Airlines are still my full-time thing, but it is fun to, have both.
And in some ways, it's even a bigger opportunity, maybe because there's not just the railroad industry, the railroad companies themselves, but like it seems like any company that relies on the supply chain would have someone within that company who needs to be keeping their eyes on what's going on with any kind of freight, shipping across oceans, trucking, and then also the railroads, and then also airlines to a certain extent as well. But it seems like, especially with the supply chain issues over the last few years, so like, do you see like a lot of like when you're looking at your subscribers, like hedge fund guys and other kind of ancillary industries that are subscribing to the newsletter?
100%. Yeah, I was actually surprised at the diversity of the subscriber base. I mean, yeah, as you mentioned a few of the categories: ports, software companies, shippers, the railroads themselves. So yeah, it's quite a diverse group, and I think that's true, generally in the airline industry too. But yeah, it's a bigger ecosystem than I thought. The and there's and well, I was going to say it's because the railroads are so profitable now. The airline industry is very profitable too. Just the airlines don't make the money. The other, all the other suppliers and stakeholders do. But although that's changing to some extent. But yeah, and the railroads definitely a lot of spending power, a lot of money. It's a very large industry. Yeah.
And obviously, you're launching in a vastly different internet than when you launched in 2004. You kind of had to keep everything behind a paywall. Maybe you could give away a few free issues by hand of the PDF or printouts or whatever. Now, Substack has all sorts of tools where you can put part of the newsletter behind the paywall and send the other part to the whole free list. Obviously, social media is a bigger play. Now, SEO is a bigger play. How's your marketing different today than it was, 20 years ago?
Yeah, and again, because Railroad Weekly, it's almost for me, it's just a more of a, I mean, hobby is the wrong word. I mean, but it's more of like a weekend thing. Honestly, I almost do zero marketing. It's pretty much, I write it, I read about railroads, I listen to, conference calls like I do for the airlines. And I, every Saturday morning I write something up and pretty much send it out. I have a few friends that I've made in the industry who've helped me distribute it, helped me, kind of find the right people who can in turn find the right people to, help me. So I've done some of that. I've done almost no social media, nothing really like that. It's pretty much I put it on Substack and let it go. And I thought about, and I did a little bit of this, before I restarted with Skift. I did actually hired two different companies. This is also for Econ Weekly when I was doing that. Hired two different companies to help me with the marketing. And it just never worked out for me. It wound up being just more of a headache, more time consuming, more. And I'm happy to go into more detail about that if you'd like. But so there's always part of me. I have the budget where if someone came along and said, "Hey, I want to, I want to help you market this thing," and my approach would be like, "Yeah, okay, if it's the right person, I would consider that, but it would have to be like totally." Not take up any of my time, be very someone who could just take it on by themselves. So yeah, and I'm totally content with that. I mean, I'm very happy with I've got subscriptions coming in. It's not a ton of money. It's nice extra income, and I enjoy it. So I'm at peace with that.
And are you utilizing Substack's like paywall features that allow you to send out to the free list versus like some kind of truncated version?
Yeah, totally. So for the first year, I gave it away for free, and that helped me kind of spread the word. And then I started charging. Yeah, I think it's been about a year. I think literally June of 22. I think, and that's when I started using the paywall feature, and I vary that up. I don't know if there's a best way to do that, but occasionally, I will send an issue without the paywall and. Sometimes I'll put the paywall very high up, sometimes very low. I just kind of vary it up and see how that goes. But But I absolutely use the Substack features.
And you're charging a lot for this as well.
Yeah, so it's just below $1,000 for, and even a little bit above that if you pay monthly, and same type approach, same type of thinking, where these are corporate people. This is not people paying out of their own pockets, and hopefully I'm providing enough value there. It's a lot of data, it's a lot of information synthesized, and hopefully the idea is, if you're working for the rail industry and you read this thing, you'll be able to have a fluent conversation with anyone about what's going on, what are the hot trends, what are the parts of the market that are doing well, what are the parts of the market that are not doing well, and yeah, that's just a big part of kind of the value proposition, I guess you could say.
And what years do you plan to launch Trucking Weekly and Shipping Weekly?
Yeah, you ready, Simon? Let's do it together. Problem is time. Yeah, there's so many. I have so many ideas. I love doing that. Like, I love writing. I just love listening to these conference calls and just bringing everything together. And wait, that's important. That's not important. Wait, he said this and this, and constantly having ideas for new things. But time is always. But the one that I'd love to do, and I'll never do it because it's over was healthcare, because one thing I learned when I was doing my econ newsletter is healthcare is 20% of the economy, but it's so complex, and it operates, the economics of it, just this whole set of different rules, just a ton of government intervention, and the things you learn about in Econ 101 about how markets operate, and just they don't apply in healthcare, or they apply in different ways. That would be like a really, really fascinating newsletter to have like someone try to explain that. And I tried to do a little bit of that in Econ Weekly, and I still have my old newsletters up there on the Econ Weekly Substack site for anybody interested. But yeah, there's no shortage of ideas.
Yeah, I also feel like energy would just be a really fascinating thing to cover.
And another very large, important industry that's changing a lot. Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
All right, Jay. Well, those were all the questions I had for you. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so Railroad Weekly at Substack. That's to see that, and if you want to, it's railroadweekly.substack.com, and you can see econweekly.com.biz. Sorry, econweekly.biz is where you can see my old Econ Weekly stuff, and then be sure to check out Airline Weekly and also Skift.com. That's where you can read about our latest airline coverage.
Awesome. Well, this is a lot of fun. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, and I should also add, always feel free to reach out to me if it's an airline-related question. I'm at js@skift.com, or you can email me at j@railroadweekly.com, either one.